Today, the U.S. Supreme Court announced it is taking up the case involving one of the world's most popular social media apps, TikTok, against the United States government, which is threatening to ban it. The stage is set for a landmark ruling affecting tens of millions of American users. Whatever the 9 justices decide, it's likely to set a precedent in digital media law going forward. TikTok appealed to the highest court in the land to block legislation passed earlier this year, which sets a January 19th deadline for the app's Chinese owner ByteDance to sell its U.S. version. Otherwise, it must be removed from U.S. app stores and internet hosts. U.S. lawmakers say TikTok is a security risk because China's communist authorities could access U.S. users' data. The Supreme Court is due to hear the TikTok case just days before next month's deadline and before Donald Trump returns to the White House as president again. During his first term, Trump appointed 3 of the justices, strengthening the court's conservative majority. The president-elect was once himself in favor of banning TikTok, but earlier this week, he signaled a change of heart.
We'll take a look at TikTok. You know, I have a warm spot in my heart for TikTok because I won youth by 34 points. And there are those that say that TikTok had something to do with that.
To talk more about this, let's bring in Ann Kokas, who is a professor of media studies at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Among her extensive publications is the book Trafficking Data: How China is Winning the Battle for Digital Sovereignty. Professor Kokas joins us tonight from Hawaii, and we welcome her. During Donald Trump's first term as president, he tried to ban TikTok with an executive order in 2020, saying the risks are real. Now he appears to be not so sure. What changed?
Well, we've seen a magical shift in Donald Trump's perspective on TikTok when he started to get the support of investors in ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, when he's received the support of Elon Musk, someone who's a huge fan of massive social media deregulation. So this sea change isn't really surprising. What is surprising, though, is how quickly the Supreme Court took up this case. And it'll be very interesting to see whether or not they took it up because they wanted to make sure the law was enforced before Donald Trump took office, or as a way to help pave the way for changes in the ban.
In your expert opinion, is TikTok an app that can be used for spying by China?
Absolutely. And I think we need to actually take the Chinese government's words for this, because one of the major obstacles for the U.S. Sale of TikTok is the fact that the Chinese government treats TikTok's algorithm as a national security asset. So what this ultimately means is that in order to sell TikTok inclusive of its algorithm, the Chinese government has to give export approval. So this underscores the fact that the Chinese government sees TikTok as a major security concern. So the U.S. should treat it as such as well.
In your latest book, you argue U.S. data policies have helped China create infrastructures for global control, I believe is how you put it. Help explain what you mean by that to the non-specialists out there.
So what this ultimately means is that while the U.S. has created this kind of Wild West that allows for massive investment and massive growth and innovation, and we see this with the growth of U.S. firms, what it also means is that we are in a landscape where any kind of Chinese data gathering that happens in the U.S., with a few exceptions that come through, for example, specific executive orders or agency rules, really can continue unabated by U.S. law. So what I argue for in the book is that it's important for the U.S. to work with our allies and partners, like the European Union, to be able to establish clearer road rules for how we gather data globally.
You mentioned the European Union. You may know that here in Europe, TikTok is under investigation by the European Commission after Romania's presidential election was annulled by a court there due to alleged TikTok influence. Here's what an EU official said this week.
We must protect our democracies from foreign interference, especially when it comes to elections. We suspect that foreign actors use TikTok to interfere in the Romanian presidential elections. This is why today the Commission has decided to open formal proceedings against TikTok under the Digital Services Act for a suspected breach of its obligations relating to electoral processes and civic discourse.
Professor, I know you focus on the risks from China, but what is it about TikTok and the way it operates that would make it a potential danger to democracy?
Well, it's important to separate the dangers that TikTok presents as a social media app that we see occurring in a wide context of different social media, through Instagram, through Facebook, through other social media sites that are widely used by Gen Z in particular and other youth voters. However, the key point is that within the context of TikTok, its parent company ByteDance is subject to Chinese government oversight in a way that no U.S.-based U.S.-based social media platforms are. So, for example, Facebook, Instagram, they can't even operate in China, let alone face Chinese government scrutiny. Whereas ByteDance is dependent on continued existence in the Chinese market to be able to succeed as a company.
Well, TikTok, in its appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, argues Americans are, quote, duly informed of the alleged risks of covert content manipulation, and that it's a matter of free choice. Would you agree it's an informed choice for users?
So I have a great story for this. I teach a class called the Data Ethics of TikTok and at the University of Virginia. And as part of this class, I have my students read the terms of service for TikTok. And I've taught this class maybe 6 times, and no one in the class has ever read a terms of service ever in their life, let alone the TikTok terms of service. So no, I don't think that consumers are adequately informed about the risks that they're facing.
And you think that the owners know that?
I would say that there is a quite widespread understanding that users in general don't click through the terms of service.
Even if TikTok were eventually actually banned in the U.S., the issue of potentially sensitive online data in the hands of foreign actors isn't going away, is it?
Absolutely not. And this is part of what I discuss in my book and other writings, is that because of the extremely loose data governance framework in the US in particular, the Chinese government can also purchase data from other social media apps and platforms, as well as other types of products that are operating within the US. So it's not that TikTok is the only source of this data. However, as was discussed earlier related to elections, the potential for election manipulation and content that voters engage with can really function as a destabilizing factor for important democratic processes.
Professor and media expert Ann Kokas, genuinely appreciate your insights today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
For more on this, I'm joined now by DW reporter Stefan Simons in Washington, D.C. Stefan, the U.S. Supreme Court has announced it is taking up the TikTok case. What kind of signal does this send?
Well, it was actually expected that it ends up in front of the Supreme Court. Just earlier in December, a federal appeals court had upheld the ban or the law threatening to ban TikTok if they don't divest and sell it to a non-Chinese entity. Now, TikTok refused that, but the appeals court said in early December that the government has the right to ban TikTok for national security concerns, and they trump constitutional issues or thoughts on this. However, the Supreme Court decided to add this to the docket, and that is unusual late in the game to add something like this. However, there was a social media related decision in June already by the Supreme Court, so this signals that at least the Supreme Court is taking this serious, the question if a ban of TikTok is constitutional or not.
Well, TikTok is trying to prevent the imminent shutdown in the U.S. by appealing to the Supreme Court, as you've mentioned. How likely is it that TikTok will succeed there?
That's a question I can't really answer. I don't know if anybody can answer this now. That's up to the judges. They will hear arguments. And they have really foregone a phase where those who argument in front of the Supreme Court have to actually write up their argument. They scrap all of this. They say 10th of January, that's it. We hear the arguments. And then, guess what? It doesn't have to take that long for them to decide if it's unconstitutional or not. First Amendment, again, that's the freedom of religion, speech, press, and petition. That is one of the most important amendments to the Constitution. So that's not lightweight, and they will expectedly not take this very lightly and take hopefully their sweet time to decide if it's constitutional or not to ban TikTok.
Stefan, fair enough. Could TikTok also hope for help from Trump as soon as he's sworn in as U.S. president in January?
That's also a tricky one. Why? Because Donald Trump changed his mind on TikTok several times. It was, remember, him in his last stint as president of the United States, when he was president of the United States, said like TikTok is no good, Chinese-owned company, it's a security risk, we want to get rid of it. Now the Republicans, his own party, took this very serious, and a bipartisan, let's not forget, a bipartisan decision led to this law, to this ban of TikTok, or the alternative, as you mentioned, to sell it to a US or somebody else who can run TikTok then, but it can't be Chinese for security, national security reasons. Now, lately, and that includes a meeting just Monday between Donald Trump and the CEO of TikTok at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump came out just a few hours later in a press conference and said he has a, quote, warm spot in his heart for TikTok, end quote. So let's see what a Trump administration, a Trump presidency will do just coming into power one day after the ban is actually supposed to take effect. January 19th, January 20th, the inauguration of Donald Trump as president of the United States. Interesting.
This is a dynamic situation, to say the least. Watch this space. DW reporter Stefan Simons in Washington, D.C. Many thanks as always, Stefan.